We're letting you go. That's what Margaret Brandt, the CEO of Meadow Pines Hospital, said to me as she slid a termination letter across her glass desk. Her tone so casual, it could have passed for small talk. My name is Debra Whitman. I'm 58 years old, and until 15 minutes ago, I was the head of internal audit for one of the largest nonprofit hospitals in the Pacific Northwest. I had exactly 3 days left before my employment contract would automatically convert into lifetime tenure, along with full pension and post-retirement health care. 3 days. I stared down at the letter, then up at Margaret, who was already glancing at her watch like she had somewhere more important to be. Effective immediately, she added. I didn't say anything at first, not because I was stunned, but because I'd spent the last 2 years preparing for this exact moment. Something about the timing, the suddenness, it was too neat, too clean. And I knew neat and clean didn't exist in the real world, especially not in finance. I stood up, smoothed the sleeves of my blazer, and quietly said, "Thank you for the clarity." That was when I saw her blink, just once, like my reaction didn't fit the script she was expecting. I left without another word. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't call anyone. I drove home in silence, letting the April rain blur the highway, the exit signs, the lines of loyalty and betrayal that I had clung to for over 2 decades. You see, I started working at Meadow Pines when my daughter was still in middle school. I was a single mother back then, trying to rebuild after a divorce that left me with nothing but a used Camry and a broken heart. But I was damn good at what I did. Internal controls, regulatory compliance, financial transparency, all the stuff that makes most people's eyes glaze over. That was my world. Over the years, I became the quiet watchdog, never flashy, never political, just thorough, dependable, honest, which is probably why I saw things I wasn't supposed to. It started with little things, donation logs that didn't match disbursement reports, vendor payments that seemed inflated. Then came the quarterly financials, polished, pristine, and completely disconnected from the numbers I knew to be real. I flagged the inconsistencies, filed the reports, escalated through the proper channels. Every time, I was told to stay in my lane or focus on forward-facing risk. Translation: keep quiet, stop digging. Then 6 months ago, they brought in a new deputy director of operations, James Rook. He came from the private sector, carried himself like a man who thought nonprofit meant easy to exploit. Within weeks, he started slashing departments, consolidating control, and pushing through a budget overhaul that bypassed nearly every compliance protocol we had. And I refused to sign off on it. I wrote a formal objection, submitted it to the board, and attached a detailed breakdown of every violation I could verify. 2 weeks later, I was pulled from all major audit reviews. 3 weeks after that, my office was moved to the basement. But I still showed up, I still documented. I still believed that if I just kept doing the right thing, someone, somewhere, would listen. And now, here I was. Fired. 3 days before my pension. For restructuring. Margaret had called it a tough but necessary decision. She hadn't even looked me in the eye. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the termination letter. On the back of it was a severance agreement, 3 months' pay in exchange for signing away all future claims against the hospital. No pension, no health care, no acknowledgement of 26 years of service, and a deadline. Return signed by Sunday, 5 p.m. It was a trap. But they'd underestimated me. Because upstairs, locked inside a fireproof cabinet behind a row of old tax records, were 2 banker boxes filled with printed emails, flagged invoices, falsified vendor contracts, and internal memos, some of which were signed by Margaret herself. I hadn't planned to use them. But then again, I hadn't planned to be stabbed in the back either. As I opened the cabinet and pulled the boxes into the light, one thought echoed in my mind. They think I'm just going to walk away. They have no idea what's coming. The boxes were heavier than I remembered. I carried them downstairs and set them gently on the dining table, where I'd once hosted Thanksgiving dinners and late-night homework marathons. Now that table would become the staging ground for the biggest battle of my life. As I opened the first box, the smell of old paper and ink filled the air. Each folder inside was labeled, tabbed, and dated. I hadn't known, back then, what exactly I was building. But something in my gut had told me to keep everything. Invoices marked urgent for services never rendered. Donation records altered after audit periods closed. Memos with suspicious language like adjusting optics or non-standard reconciliation. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. This was a system, a quiet siphoning of funds dressed up in euphemisms and buried under layers of administrative fog. I worked through the night, cataloging everything. By 2 a.m., I'd organized the materials into 6 binders and created a digital index on a flash drive. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, sharp in a way I hadn't felt in years. By morning, I'd reached out to Omar. He picked up on the second ring. "Deborah?" His voice still carried that steady calm I remembered from our time working together in compliance audits over a decade ago. "It's been a long time. I need your help," I said. By the time we hung up an hour later, he had already looped in 2 senior investigators from the Office of Inspector General. A meeting was scheduled for Monday. He urged me not to respond to any communication from the hospital until then, but that was easier said than done. By noon, my phone started lighting up. First, it was a friendly voicemail from Janet in HR. Then 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, likely the hospital's legal team. And then, at 3:12 p.m., a text from James Rook himself. "Let's not make this messy. Sign the agreement, Deborah. You don't want to burn bridges this late in your career." My hands shook as I read it. Not from fear, but from the sheer audacity. They thought I'd just fold. That after 2.5 decades of clean records, glowing reviews, and staying silent, I'd roll over and let them wipe me out. They didn't just fire me. They were trying to erase me, and it was working. I tried logging into the hospital's employee portal to download my performance history. Access denied. My hospital email disabled. Even my badge, which I'd forgotten to turn in, now flashed red at the side entrance when I tested it out of curiosity. By sunset, they'd scrubbed me from the internal directory and employee database. I wasn't just unemployed, I was a ghost, but I wasn't going to let them bury me that easy. The next morning, I drove to a local print shop and had all 6 binders copied in triplicate. I stored one at home, one at a safe deposit box, and prepped the third to bring to Monday's meeting. That night, I received another text, this time from an unknown number. "We can still fix this. Name your price." No name, no context, just desperation disguised as opportunity. They were sweating, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me or my pension. They were covering up something bigger, something that could collapse more than just reputations. So I called my daughter. "Elizabeth?" I said. "Something's happening, and I don't want to lie to you about it." I told her everything, the firing, the documents, the investigation I was about to walk into. She didn't ask me if I was scared. She asked me if I was sure. "I'm sure," I said. "They messed with the wrong woman." That night, I got an email through my personal account from a former colleague in accounting. Subject line: "You didn't hear this from me." Attached was a scanned memo. It had been circulated that afternoon, marked confidential. It outlined a proposed emergency fund transfer, nearly $2 million, to an external vendor partnership connected to one of James Rook's shell companies, scheduled for Monday morning. The same time as my meeting with the federal investigators. They were trying to move the money before anyone could stop them. They didn't realize I was already 10 steps ahead. And on Monday, I'd be bringing everything. Monday morning, I woke up before the sun. My nerves were shot, but my focus was razor sharp. I dressed like I was heading into a courtroom. Dark navy blazer, closed-toe heels, hair pinned back. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I needed to walk in looking like the exact opposite of what they thought I was. Weak, defeated, disposable. I arrived at the federal building at 8:43 a.m., binder in hand, flash drive tucked safely inside a zippered pocket of my briefcase. Omar met me in the lobby and gave me a tight nod. "They've already started digging based on your materials," he said. "But what you bring today will determine how deep we go." Inside the conference room, 2 investigators from the Office of Inspector General were waiting. One was a woman named Evelyn Grant, calm, sharp, and direct. The other was Darren Lee, a forensic accountant who looked like he hadn't slept in 72 hours. They didn't waste time. We spent the first 2 hours going through the donation discrepancies, then moved into the manipulated vendor invoices and shell payment structures. Every time I presented a new document, Darren's eyebrows rose a little higher. Evelyn asked pointed questions, jotting notes with intense precision. "This isn't just mismanagement," Darren finally said, flipping through one of the folders. "This is layered, structured embezzlement, and it goes way beyond your termination." I nodded. I knew something was off for years, but I couldn't prove the scope, not until now. At exactly 11:06 a.m., Evelyn received a call. She stepped out briefly, then returned with a tight expression. "That emergency transfer you flagged in that email? It was just executed 20 minutes ago. $2 million to a Nevada-based vendor that doesn't legally exist." My stomach dropped. "They did it anyway?" "They tried," she corrected. "We froze the account just in time." I exhaled for the first time all morning. "They're going to panic now," Omar said, almost to himself. "They'll know someone gave us a heads up." As if on cue, my phone started buzzing in my bag. Again and again. I didn't check it. I already knew what it would say. Margaret, James, legal counsel, HR. Maybe even the board. By noon, we'd wrapped the main debrief. Evelyn thanked me and assured me that whistleblower protection had already been activated under federal statutes. Omar walked me to the elevators. "Go home," he said gently. "Let us handle the next phase." But I couldn't go home just yet. I needed answers. So I drove to a small cafe near the hospital, neutral ground, and sent a single text to the person who'd emailed me the leaked memo. "Meet me, same place we had our last audit review." 10 minutes later, Allison, one of the senior accountants I used to supervise, walked in. She looked pale and nervous. "They're imploding," she whispered as she sat down. "They know something huge is happening." James freaked out and locked himself in his office. Margaret had a shouting match with the CFO this morning. And now, "There's a rumor you've gone federal." I didn't confirm anything. I just looked at her. "Why'd you help me, Allison?" She hesitated, then looked down. "Because I found something I wasn't supposed to." She slid a USB across the table. "It's from the internal server backup. I copied it before they changed access permissions. There's a hidden folder with payroll records." I frowned. "Payroll?" Allison nodded slowly. "They created fake employees, Deborah. At least a dozen, with real paychecks, going to accounts under shell names. I traced one of them. It's in Margaret Brandt's husband's name." I felt my pulse spike. "You're sure?" "Positive. I almost didn't come today. But I figured, if they're willing to do this to you, what's stopping them from doing worse to anyone else?" I took the USB and stared at it for a long second. My hands were actually shaking. This wasn't just financial manipulation anymore. This was criminal conspiracy and money laundering. And now I had the proof. As I drove home, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to earth, a single thought pulsed in my mind. They tried to fire me to save themselves, but they just handed me the match that could burn it all down. If you've ever been robbed of your voice like this, hit 2 in the comments. I know I'm not the only one. By Tuesday morning, the fuse had already been lit. The OIG had launched their formal investigation, and word was spreading fast. A quiet buzz turned into full-on panic inside Meadow Pines. Staff meetings were being canceled. Legal counsel stopped replying to emails. James Rook's car was spotted leaving the parking lot at 5 a.m. He didn't return all day. But I wasn't done, not even close. At 9 a.m., I submitted the USB Allison had given me directly to the investigators. Within minutes, they confirmed what she'd told me. Over a dozen fake employees, with regular bi-weekly paychecks routed to shell accounts, one of which was tied to Margaret Brandt's husband's LLC. They had tried to funnel nonprofit donations meant for cancer patients into private real estate portfolios. I didn't even feel rage anymore, just cold precision. After handing off the evidence, I made one final stop before going home: the local news station. I didn't go in guns blazing. I didn't give a full interview. I gave them a sealed envelope. Inside, a redacted version of the memo outlining the transfer, time-stamped logs of my termination date, and a brief, anonymous tip-off about an active federal investigation tied to embezzlement at a major nonprofit hospital. They ran the story by 6 p.m., and everything exploded. The hospital's name was all over the evening news. Federal audit underway at Meadow Pines. Millions in donations missing. By Wednesday, 3 more internal staffers contacted me quietly. One forwarded me a screenshot of a Slack thread that had been deleted within minutes. It read, "If Deborah releases what I think she has, we're looking at criminal charges. Full stop. Rook." That same day, I received an email from the hospital's board of directors. It was cold, corporate, and way too late. "Ms. Whitman, we request a meeting to clarify recent developments. Your insight would be valuable to the internal review process." I ignored it. Instead, I sent a reply to only one person on that board. Dr. Lena Marshall, the only one who had ever treated me like more than just a line on an org chart. My message was simple. You have until Friday to act with integrity. After that, the full report goes public. Choose wisely. Thursday morning, the board called a press conference. I watched it live from my living room. Dr. Marshall took the podium, visibly tense but composed. Behind her, Margaret and James were notably absent. "We've launched an independent forensic audit," she said. "Effective immediately, CEO Margaret Brandt and Deputy Director James Rook are placed on administrative leave pending investigation." It wasn't a confession, but it was a beginning. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But something still gnawed at me. I knew them. I knew their patterns. If they were quiet, it wasn't because they were defeated. It was because they were still planning something. So I pulled out my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched since before my termination, and started digging through archived files from our old compliance server. That's when I found it. A digital folder I hadn't opened in over a year, from a quarterly audit James had insisted I skip, said it wasn't necessary at the time. I had saved the backup out of habit, thinking it was routine. But buried inside was a spreadsheet that didn't match any of our internal ledgers. It listed a series of patient names, diagnoses, billing codes, treatments. Except, the patients weren't real, and the treatments had never occurred. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They weren't just embezzling funds from donors. They were billing Medicare and Medicaid for fake procedures under fabricated patient accounts. This wasn't just corporate fraud anymore. This was federal healthcare fraud. And with that discovery, the stakes changed entirely. Because now, it wasn't just about firing me, stealing donations, or rigging vendor payments. Now, they were facing felony charges that could lead to real prison time. I sent the file straight to the federal team and left one message on Omar's voicemail. "Call me the second you get this. I found it. I found everything." That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sky bleed from orange into navy. The truth was no longer buried. It had teeth now, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was in control. The next time someone thinks they can destroy a woman 3 days before her pension, they better remember my name. It all came crashing down on a Friday, exactly 2 weeks after I was escorted out of Meadow Pines, with nothing but a cardboard box and a forced smile. By that point, the investigation had turned from internal review to full-blown federal prosecution. The fake patient files I uncovered triggered an immediate response from the Department of Health and Human Services. Medicare fraud wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The morning began with news breaking across every local channel. Meadow Pines executives indicted on federal charges, including wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsified medical billing. I sat in my kitchen, sipping black coffee, watching James Rook's face flash across the screen. Gone was the smug grin and perfect tie. In its place, a mugshot. Hollow eyes, no blazer, just a county-issued jumpsuit. Margaret Brandt didn't even get the dignity of a quiet arrest. Agents walked her out of her home at 7:32 a.m. in front of press vans, neighbors, and her own children. She screamed about setting the record straight and called the charges political theater, but the cameras caught her shaking. Later that day, Dr. Lena Marshall, the lone board member who had reached out to me, held another press conference. This time, she didn't hold back. "We failed to act on repeated internal warnings," she said. Deborah Whitman provided documentation multiple times over the course of several years. Her concerns were dismissed. That was our failure. And for that, we offer not just an apology, but restitution. She announced that the hospital would be launching a new internal ethics division, and they were naming it after me, the Whitman Center for Compliance and Integrity. I didn't cry, not when I saw it live, not even when my daughter called, crying on my behalf. But I did smile. A real one. The kind that comes after years of being overlooked, ignored, and finally, heard. The Justice Department issued a statement later that week, confirming that both Margaret and James were being prosecuted not only for fraud, but for conspiracy to defraud a federal program, a charge that carried serious prison time. As for the others, the CFO resigned in disgrace. 3 board members stepped down under pressure after investigators found they'd signed off on multiple, unusual transactions over the years. Meadow Pines lost several high-profile donors, but gained something else, a new reputation. Not as the hospital that got caught, but the hospital that changed because someone refused to stay silent. They tried to take everything from me, my job, my pension, my reputation. And for a while, it almost worked. But in the end, the one thing they couldn't erase was the truth. And the truth buried them. 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom, wearing a navy dress suit, watching James Rook plead guilty. He didn't look at me, not once. Margaret sat 2 rows behind him, surrounded by her legal team, her expression frozen. The judge asked if I'd like to make a statement. I kept it simple. "My name is Deborah Whitman. I was the head of internal audit at Meadow Pines for 26 years. I did my job. They didn't." The room was silent. I didn't stay for sentencing. I didn't need to. I had already won. Today, I live in a quiet lakeside house not far from where my daughter now teaches at a public school. I spend mornings reading, gardening, and consulting when I feel like it. I was offered a 7-figure whistleblower award under the False Claims Act. I accepted it. Not out of greed, but principle. Because after everything they put me through, I deserved more than just justice. I deserved peace, and I finally have it. I may not have chosen to be a whistleblower, but I chose not to be afraid. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. If that ending hit you hard too, drop a 2 in the comments, and stick around if you want more stories like this.